Hello, this video is part 4 in a 4-part series that will discuss setting up Advanced Revenue Management, or ARM. Part 4 will provide an overview of setting Advanced Revenue Management preferences in NetSuite. This is part 4. Advanced Revenue Management includes many preferences that enable you to configure the way revenue is recognized in your account. We will cover how to set revenue recognition accounting preferences and available accounting preferences. To set up revenue recognition accounting preferences, go to Setup, highlight Accounting, click Accounting Preferences. Click the General subtab. Scroll to the Revenue Recognition group of the Preferences. The default deferred revenue account preference is on the Items Transactions subtab. Set preferences as desired and click Save. The following accounting preferences are available with the Advanced Revenue Management feature. If you are using other revenue and expense recognition features, other accounting preferences may be available. Revenue Recognition. Create revenue recognition journals in General Ledger or GL. Provides a choice for posting revenue recognition and reclassification of journal entries. Detail. One detailed journal entry is created for all plans selected for revenue recognition posting, and 1 to 3 entries for reclassification journal entry creation. The journal entries include separate lines for each plan, and each line posts separately in the General Ledger. Summary. Revenue recognition and reclassification are summarized for posting. The summaries are based on matching attributes. For details, see the help topics Using Summarized Revenue Recognition Journal Entries and Summarized Reclassification Journal Entries. Default Deferred Revenue Reclassification Account. Arrangement level and group level unbilled receivable adjustments require a deferred revenue account for reclassification purposes. Select a default account when the unbilled receivable adjustment journal grouping preference is set to arrangement or subarrangement group to avoid errors in the month-end reclassification. You can also set a reclassification account in the Financial subtab of the customer record. The account set on the customer record overrides the system default. Unbilled Receivable Adjustment Journal Grouping. Select the grouping for reclassification of unbilled receivables. This accounting preference is book-specific. When multi-book accounting is enabled, it appears on the accounting book record instead of the Accounting Preferences page. The options are as follows. Element. The unbilled receivable adjustment is calculated for each revenue element. This is the default. Arrangement. The unbilled receivable adjustment is calculated for the revenue arrangement as a whole. Arrangement level adjustments to deferred revenue are posted to the deferred revenue account specified by the account preference default deferred revenue reclassification account. Subarrangement group. The unbilled receivable adjustment is calculated for a group of revenue elements in an arrangement. The group is identified by the value of the unbilled receivable group field of the revenue element. Revenue elements within the arrangement that have the same unbilled receivable group value are calculated together. Use sales price as fair value. When this box is checked, if a matching record is not found in the fair value price list, the allocation uses the sales price as the fair value. When the sales price is used as a fair value, the value of ISVSOE defaults to yes in the revenue element. If the box is not checked, you receive an error message and must either define the fair value for the item or check the box for this preference. Revenue Arrangement Update Frequency. Select how revenue arrangements are synchronized with sales transactions. When the manual option is selected, go to Financial, highlight Other Transactions, highlight Update Revenue Arrangements and Revenue Recognition. Or go to Transactions, highlight Financial, highlight Update Revenue Arrangements and Revenue Recognition Plans, the administrator role, and click Update Revenue Arrangements to update revenue arrangements. When you select Automatic, the system updates revenue arrangements every 3 hours. Select how revenue arrangements are synchronized with sales transactions. Revenue Plan Update Frequency. Select how revenue recognition plans are synchronized with revenue arrangements. When the manual option is selected, go to Financial, highlight Other Transactions, highlight Update Revenue Arrangements and Revenue Recognition. Revenue Plan Update Frequency. Select how revenue recognition plans are synchronized with revenue arrangements, or go to Transactions, highlight Financial, highlight Update Revenue Arrangements and Revenue Recognition Plans, the administrator role, and click Update Revenue Arrangements to update revenue arrangements. When you select Automatic, the system updates revenue arrangements every 3 hours. Revenue Plan Update Frequency. Select how revenue plans are synchronized with revenue arrangements. Default Standard Revenue Recognition Rule. Select the Revenue Recognition Rule to use by default for items. Default Catch-up Period. Select the catch-up period to use by default when an actual revenue plan that has been on hold resumes. When the hold is removed, this is the value that appears in the catch-up period field. You can change the value by editing the plan. The options for default are as follows. Blank. You must set the catch-up period on the revenue plan. Current period. This is the default for this accounting preference. First open period. The accounts payable close determines whether a period is closed. Enable Contingent Revenue Handling. Check this box to enable contingent revenue handling. When enabled, fields are added to item records and revenue elements for contingent revenue. This is a book-level preference. When multi-book accounting is enabled, this preference appears on the accounting book record, not on the Accounting Preferences page. Number of short-term revenue periods. Enter the number of short-term revenue periods to include in the Deferred Revenue Waterfall report. Integers from 0 through 52, inclusive, are valid values. The default is 12. Enable Fair Value Range Checking. When this box is checked, the Fair Value Range Checking Policy drop-down list and its dependent fields are added to the Fair Value Price record. The Fair Value Range Checking Policy is also added to the item Revenue Category record. This preference is checked by default. For more information, see Creating the Fair Value Price list. Default Revenue Arrangement Form. Select the system form to use for revenue arrangements. The options are Standard Revenue Arrangement, plus any custom forms created during implementation. Default Revenue Recognition Journal Entry Form. Select the journal entry form to use for revenue recognition journal entries. The options are Standard Journal Entry, plus any custom journal entry forms created during implementation. Default Reclassification Journal Entry Form. Select the journal entry form to use for Deferred Revenue Reclassification journal entries. The options are Standard Journal Entry, plus any custom journal entry forms created during implementation. Create and maintain revenue element upon closed order. This preference is checked by default. When you close a sales order or a line on an order after the revenue element has been created, NetSuite does not update the revenue element. You must create a journal entry to correct the deferred revenue. For example, create a sales order for 10 units of an item. After you fulfill and bill 5 units, the item is discontinued. You close the item line on the sales order, and the revenue element is not updated if this preference is checked. Clear this preference to enable the system to update the revenue element in the previous example. The quantity on the revenue element is adjusted and all amounts are updated. In multi-element arrangements, the revenue is reallocated. Enable Advanced Cost Amortization. Check this box to enable the accrual and amortization of eligible sales costs associated with the contract. When the box is checked, you record eligible sales costs on the revenue arrangement and revenue element. Amortization of these costs is tracked on the revenue recognition plan. When Enable Advanced Cost Amortization is checked, you must select a Contract Acquisition Expense Account and a Contract Acquisition Deferred Expense Account. Items, Transactions. Default Deferred Revenue Account. Select the Deferred Revenue Account to use by default for sales transactions. This account appears by default on item records. The default option is the System-Generated Deferred Revenue Account. Thank you for watching our NetSuite videos. If you have further questions, please email netsuite@a2q2.com.